The Labour Party has won this general election.
British people trusted them more than us.
Clearly a terrible night for the Conservatives.
I'm sorry.
We're going to have to get together again and figure out what it is that we've done wrong.
We've tried the patience of traditional Conservative voters with a propensity to create an endless political soap opera.
Hello and welcome. Well, as you know, the Conservative Party at the last election were decimated. They suffered their worst election result since the modern party came into existence. And we're going to see a Conservative Party leadership election. And so the question is, who is best placed amongst the candidates that might put themselves forward to lead the Conservative Party at the next election? And how much can they achieve? Well, to hear a little bit about how this debate is usually framed, let's hear from George Osborne, who was Chancellor of the Exchequer under David Cameron.
It's a very hard tactical choice and for the new leader, which is the obvious thing to do if you look at the maths, is to say, let's go and get the 14-15% who voted Reform, add it to the 24% who voted Conservative, and we're ahead of Labour. It's easy, job done, without noticing really what I think is the central challenge, which is the Conservative Party over a number of years vacated the central ground of British politics and allowed the Labour Party to move from the Corbynista position it was in to the centre ground. It allowed the Liberal Democrats to get the largest number of seats they've had in a century and decimate the Tories in places like the West Country. And if you don't win back that centre ground, you know, frankly, you may get some of those Reform votes somehow, although I don't see it's obvious how you do that. And you will lose more of your centre ground support in doing so. And there's nothing that says the Labour Party is stuck on 34% of the vote. There's no reason why they couldn't go up higher and deprive you of the majority, even if you manage to get some of those Reform people on side, because they've expanded their position in the centre ground.
So Osborne is presenting what I would call the conventional view of politics here, which is that elections are won in the centre ground, and this relies on a theory called median voter theory. And the argument here is that most voters, so the average voter, is in the centre ground of British politics. So in order to win an election, you need to place your party in the centre ground and then capitalise on the failures of the government in order to win over the centre ground so that you can form an electoral coalition in the centre in order to take power. And there is quite a strong argument for this view at the moment. I suppose if you were defending this proposition, you would say, well, if you look at the Labour Party's victory in 2024, although they won a massive landslide, it was a very thin victory in the sense that the votes that Labour won were spread out across the country, and there are an awful lot of marginal seats in the next election, where if the Conservative Party can win back some of those voters that they lost at the last election, then they stand a chance of winning next time. So it wouldn't take a lot, it wouldn't take a big swing for the Conservative Party to take lots of seats off Labour, although they need to win loads of them, don't they, in order to put themselves in a better position. The problem with this view, two problems really, is that, well, first of all, the centre ground is quite congested at the moment. So there are lots of parties in the centre ground. Labour obviously have moved there quite decisively and have taken that territory, and the Liberal Democrats, just to the left of Labour, occupying position on the centre-left. So they need to think about, you know, what kind of position are they going to take in the centre ground? They can't just sit there and imitate the Labour Party, because actually they've got a real problem following the catastrophic period that we've all lived through, that the Conservative Party simply aren't trusted. And so if the centre ground is fairly policy light, it's not making big ideological claims or big claims about changing the country radically, then the battle over the centre ground tends to be over who can run the country best. So it's a kind of technocratic argument or an argument about competence. And the Conservative Party at the moment are going to lose that argument. The second problem for this view is that it ignores the fact that the Conservative Party have a big problem on their right. So this is similar to the problem that the Labour Party faced after the 1983 election. In that election, the party was led, of course, by Michael Foot, who was leading the Labour Party in a left-wing direction, and there were challenges within the Labour Party to democratise it, to give the left more power and control within the party. And that led to the emergence of the SDP, who went into alliance with the Liberals and thereby split the left. And that created a huge problem for the Labour Party. They went on, of course, to lose the 83 election, And the 87 election, really, for the Labour Party was an existential one, because that election was about who was actually going to be the principal party on the left. Would it be the Labour Party, or would it be the SDP Liberal Alliance, who would go on to become the Liberal Democrats? And of course we know how that went. But I think there's a real danger if the Conservative Party ignore the threat from Farage and just assume that there's a cap on the level of support that Farage can get, then there's a real problem here, right? It can get worse on the right, especially when you consider actually that the Conservative Party at this election, if they did anything well, it was tacking to the right a little bit in order to try and win the support from the people who might vote Reform. So if they move to the centre, is there a danger actually that they lose more of their core support to Reform, thereby undermining their electoral strategy, particularly in circumstances where they can't win an argument over competence? And then the final thing to think about actually is that maybe this framing is just totally wrong. And maybe the Conservative Party's actual problem is not principally about their positioning on a left-right spectrum, but actually is more fundamental and long-term. And this is kind of what I think they need to be thinking about, which is essentially that the Conservative Party have become a party that have sustained themselves with the support of a very narrow portion of the electorate. And I'm not really thinking in terms of left-right terms, I'm thinking in terms of age. So if you look at the fundamental dynamics of all of the elections we've had, 2017, 2019, 2024, and the EU referendum actually, they've all been most predicted by age. So if you're going to ask one question of somebody that voted in one of those elections to try and determine how they voted, you just ask them how old they are. And the problem for the Conservative Party is that even the 2019 landslide, well, not quite a landslide, 80-seat majority, the Johnson one, relied upon bringing together older voters and actually not doing terribly well with working age voters and particularly not doing well amongst the young. And so my view is actually the Conservative Party have got a massive long-term structural problem. If they're going to rely upon the votes of older voters, then those voters are going to leave the electorate by dying, and actually that happened at this election. And if they're not replacing their voters with younger voters, then they're going to face real problems. So my view is this: the Conservative Party need to elect a leader that understands that in order for the Conservative Party to be a viable proposition at any election, they need to start to appeal to the young. So that means that the Conservative Party need to think very deeply about how you can pitch a version of conservatism so that, it's something that's about individual liberty, freedom, low taxes, whatever, but which appeals to younger voters. And now I don't think that's impossible. I think if the Conservative Party can think about how to help young people onto the property ladder and things like that, how to deal with problems that younger voters have with rent, how to deal with problems to do with cost of living, particularly in urban areas. These are the kinds of problems that the Conservative Party, if they can address them from a right-wing perspective, they've got a chance of becoming the next government.
The Conservative Party has let you down.
Jacob Rees-Mogg losing his seat there.
The Conservative Party took its core vote for granted.
We have received a strong indication that Liz Truss has lost. For a brief time as Prime Minister, you were part of the people in power who were overseeing those things not being delivered.
I agree, I was part of that.
Our renewal as a party and a country will not be achieved by us talking to an ever smaller slice of ourselves.
Cutting a lonely figure, the Tory party cheering us.
Yeah.
This is an election that the Conservatives lost much more than Labour won.
You have sent a clear signal that the government of the United Kingdom must change.